everyone. Welcome to Storytime at the Bozeman Public Library. We are still doing virtual story times, and we're happy that you are here today. I am going to do another story on imaginary friends because we still have an art exhibit up at Storymill Community Park where several artists from around town have created imaginary friends. So that will be up until January 31st. So I wanted to read this story today called Imaginary Imaginary Fred, and it's by Ian Colfer, and it's illustrated by Oliver Jeffers. And I would like to thank Harper for letting me read this book today, Imaginary Fred. Headaches are a pain. A bee sting hurts even more. But there is one thing that's worse than getting stung on the head by a bee on a rainy day, and that is loneliness. Being alone is no fun. The first 5 minutes are okay, but it's downhill from there. And if you're alone, you're alone. It's not as if you could just wish a friend to life. Usually this is true. You can wish and wish until your hair stands on end, but no imaginary friend will appear unless the conditions are just right. And if you add a little electricity or luck or even magic, then an imaginary friend might appear just when you need one. An imaginary friend like Fred. Fred floated like a feather in the wind until a lonely little child wished for him. Fred was always happy to be summoned. He tried really hard to be the best imaginary friend he could be. He dressed up, dressed down, played ball, became a ball, and did whatever else his real friend wanted to do without once complaining. But no matter how hard Fred tried, the same thing happened every time. One day, his friend would find a real friend in the real world. A friend who did not have to be ignored when grown-ups were around. And when this day came, as it always did, Fred would feel himself fade. Usually by lunchtime on the second day, Fred would be mostly invisible. And by bedtime on the fourth day, there would barely be a scrap of Fred left, just enough for the wind to catch and whisk him into the sky, where Fred would stay until someone new wished for him. Fred was glad that his friends found other real friends to play with, but sometimes he wished he had a friend who would need him forever. He dreamed of a friend who liked reading, music, and drama like he did. He imagined them sitting together, reading adventure stories and looking for shapes in the clouds. This was Fred's dream. And one day, a lonely boy called Sam wished hard for a friend when the conditions were just perfect. And Fred appeared and soon realized that Sam was the friend he had been dreaming of. Fred never had so much fun. Sam loved to read just like Fred and was most upset if he didn't get through at least one book per day. And when they weren't reading, Sam and Fred would try to understand how the toilet worked. Or they'd listen to music on Sam's dad's sound system, which had 13 speakers. Or they would write plays and act them out for Sam's parents. But even though every morning brought new delights, Fred couldn't help thinking that every evening brought them closer to the day when Sam wouldn't need him anymore. And that would be the saddest day of his imaginary life. So Fred decided that he would enjoy every single moment with Sam until that time came. The two friends pretended to be French and studied mime. They made Japanese masks. They practiced their classical instruments. And they planned their own comic book. They called themselves the Dramatic Duo. One day, Sam came home late from a party, and Fred felt a little nervous flutter in his imaginary tummy. Was this the beginning of the end? Was he headed back into the sky? Fred checked his arm and thought maybe he had already faded a little. When Sam came home, he had an excited look in his eye, a look Fred had seen before. "I made a new friend," Sam told him. "She's a girl called Sammy," which is funny because I'm called Sam. "She loves to read and has written and illustrated her own comic book series. You're gonna love her, Fred." Fred thought he probably would love Sammy if he was able to stay around long enough to meet her. "Don't worry," Sam said. "Just because I met Sammy doesn't mean I don't need you. You're still my main man." In Fred's experience, there was only room in a heart for one best friend. "I will always be your friend," Fred said. "Just promise that you won't forget me." "I promise," said Sam, and he meant it. The next morning, Sam was gone when Fred woke up, and there was a note on his pillow. The note says, "I am meeting Sammy to brainstorm our comic book. Back later. Your pal, Sam." Comic book, thought Fred. That was our idea. Me and Sam. Fred checked his arm again. Definitely fading this time. When Sam came home several hours later, Fred called an emergency meeting of the dramatic duo. "Okay, Sam, I want to prepare you for what's coming. In a day or two, I will disappear. It's not your fault. It's just that now that you have a real friend, you don't need me anymore. The best thing you can do is just let me go without making a scene." Sam did make a scene. He swore he would never let Fred go. But the next day, Sam left the house early again to meet with Sammy, and Fred was left behind. "Oh, I can see through my hand now," thought Fred. When Sam returned home later that day, he brought Sammy with him. Sammy wore round glasses that made her eyes seem huge. She pulled a cello case behind her on a cart, and she carried an art bag so she could work on her comic book whenever an idea struck. Sam introduced them. "Sammy, meet Fred. Fred, meet Sammy." This is a waste of time," thought Fred. "Only people with an imaginary friend can see an imaginary friend." But Sammy stuck her hand out exactly the right direction and said, "Pleased to meet you, Fred." Fred was surprised. He had never been visible to two people before. He shook Sammy's hand. "I know you're worried I don't need you anymore," said Sam, "but you're wrong. I need you now more than ever." "Why?" asked Fred. "Why do you need me now? You've got Sammy." "Two reasons," said Sam. "First, I never want to let you go." Fred thought he would cry. That was only reason number one. "And reason number two?" he asked. "Tell him," said Sammy, elbowing Sam the way friends do. "Okay," said Sam. "Reason number two is that we need you to be in our quartet." Fred was confused. "Wait, quartet means 4. There are only 3 of us." "Aha," said Sam, like a great detective. "That's where you're wrong." "Yes," said Sammy, clapping her hands. "You're wrong because there are 4 of us." Sammy stepped to one side, and Fred saw a small girl with a violin case and a smile that made him want to smile too. "This is Frida," said Sammy. "Hi, Fred," said Frida, waving her hand. "Sam's told us all about you. I hope we can be friends." Sammy has an imaginary friend, Fred realized, and he waved back and noticed his hand seemed absolutely solid, not see-through at all. Frida set her violin case on the floor and opened it. "We need to practice," she said, "or we'll never get to Carnegie Hall." Sammy rolled her eyes. "Frida is so strict," she said to Fred, "but you'll get used to it in a couple of years." Fred did get used to it. He quite enjoyed being told what to do by Frida with her dazzling smile. The four friends spent all their spare time together, having violin battles, reading comic books, practicing plumbing, pretending to be French, and arguing over what they would call their quartet. They eventually settled on the quarreling quartet. That's quite a mouthful. The quarreling quartet. The quartet made their debut at the school Christmas concert, much to the confusion of the audience. But then something interesting happened. The older they grew, the less time the four friends spent together. Sam and Sammy, it seemed, preferred graphic novels to music, and they left the quartet to concentrate on their comic book series. Carnegie Hall was eventually played, not as a quartet, however, but as a duo, the dramatic duo. Again, much to the confusion of the audience. And this, dear friends, is the interesting thing that happened. Even though they didn't see their human friends much anymore, Fred and Frida did not begin to fade, nor get swept back up into the sky like they had so many times before. Instead, they stuck around being imaginary friends to each other. They became quite famous in the imaginary community, and a statue was commissioned to be erected in the sky above their imaginary house. As this was the first case of its kind, imaginary scientists spent years trying to figure out how it had happened. And eventually they concluded that friendship is friendship. Imaginary or not, the same laws apply. The statue should have disappeared every time a gust of wind came along, but it never did. Imaginary Fred. Thank you for listening to this story. So, in addition to our Menagerie of the Imaginary that is now up at Storymill Park, next week we have a kind of important day. It's called Groundhog's Day. And we have a special guest here who's going to read a story about a groundhog for Groundhog's Day. So please welcome our friend George. George works here at the library, and he's going to come and read a story about Groundhog's Day.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Cindy. I'm George, and I have today a story to read, Brownie, Groundhog, and the Wintry Surprise. It's by Susan Blackaby, and it is illustrated by Carmen Segovia, something like that, and it's published by Sterling Children's Books. Thank you very much, Sterling Children's Books. On a December afternoon, Brownie, Groundhog, and her friend, the fox, shared their picnic with a new friend, Bunny. A thin crust of ice rimmed the rocks around the pond. The fox picked crumbs out of his fur. "Perfect picnic, Brownie," he said. "What's next?" Brownie yawned. "Nap time." She wound her scarf around her neck. "I'm going home to sleep until spring." Having the picnic. "Already?" The fox's chin quivered. "What about me?" "You'll be fine," said Brownie. Each word puffed out of her mouth on a tiny cloud. "You can do wintry things." Brownie packed up her basket. "Just don't wake me up. And don't eat Bunny. She is company." A few days later, Bunny bumped into the fox, moping along the path. "You seem blue," said Bunny. "I am." The fox felt whiny. "It's so cold." "Move faster," Bunny suggested. "Try to trit-trot." She zigzagged, lippity-lippity, over the frosty ground. "Can't." The fox slumped against a stump. "I'm too sad from no Brownie and nothing to do." Bunny draped the fox's tail around her shoulders. Too bad your tail can't reach your neck, she said. Then you'd have a snug scarf for doing wintry things. The fox sighed. A cozy red one, he said, just like Brownie's. No fair, said Bunny. She doesn't even need hers. She's sleeping. That's right, said the fox, suddenly cheerful. Let's go borrow Brownie's scarf. They're at Brownie's door. It says, "Do not disturb," it reads there on the sign. Are you sure this is a good idea? Asked Bunny as they crept into Brownie's house. Positive, said the fox. He leaned over the bump in the bed. Hello, he said. May I borrow your scarf? Brownie's answer came out sounding slurry and drowsy. Beaky white, yimmy sleepy, she said. Doony dizzer. Bunny tugged the fox toward the door. Let's go, Bunny whispered. Brownie just said, Be quiet, I'm sleeping. Do not disturb. Said the fox. She wants me to look in the dresser. But don't worry, I'll be extra quiet. The fox spotted Brownie's scarf and a woolly sweater. Then he reeled out strings of lights. Ooh, he said, hatching a plan. These'll be great. We can use them for looping and twinkling. How? Asked Bunny. The fox scratched his ear. Then he gave the Brownie bump a nudge. Psst, he said. Is it okay if we grab a ladder? Brownie sounded fuzzy-muzzy. Gooey wave. Stop blubbering, bee. She snuggled deeper under her quilt. We need to leave. Bunny's eyes were as bright as buttons. Brownie said, Go away, stop bothering me. No, Brownie said, go ahead and use whatever you need. The fox rummaged in the closet, thumping and bumping, clattering and clanking. What's this stuff for? Asked Bunny, loading up the wheelbarrow. You'll see, said the fox. He waggled Brownie's shoulder. Excuse me, he said. Hammer? Brownie sat up groggy and foggy. Bumple crumpet, lemon sheep. Did she say trumpet? The fox clapped. A trumpet would be terrific. No, said Bunny. She said, let me sleep. She sounds kind of mad. Silly, said the fox. She's not mad, she's sleeping. The fox jumbled in the cupboards, hunting and grunting. Lucky us, he said, a hammer and a trumpet. When the fox had everything he needed, he teetered the wheelbarrow down the path. Bunny trooped along behind, scooping up whatever spilled. Then they got to work. They twisted and twined, decked and draped, wrapped and snapped. Bam, 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 bam. The front door flew open. Hey, Brownie was wide awake. Well, hi, said the fox. You're up early. What do you think you're doing? Snapped Brownie. A wintry thing, the fox pointed at the wreath. Sorry about the noise, said Bunny. It isn't really noise, said the fox, staring Brownie out the door. It's more of a surprise. Bunny tooted on the trumpet while the fox beat the drum. They marched 3 times around the tree so that Brownie could admire it from every angle. A wintry surprise, said Brownie. So jolly. What else have you got? We've got the hungries, said the fox. Let's fix a wintry surprise holiday feast. Bunny nodded. With pie, she said. Around Brownie's table, the candles glowed. There were streamers and poppers, crackers and snappers. The fox passed out presents, and everyone put on party hats. They dangled spoons from their noses and sang songs and giggled until they got the hiccups. Bunny slurped 3 helpings of carrot soup, and the fox stuffed himself with stuffing. "I've never been to a holiday feast before," said Brownie, "but this was the best ever." Everyone agreed. Outside, the first big snowfall of the season blanketed the path. Brownie stretched, happy and dozy. "Time for sleep," she said. "Sweet dreams," said Bunny. "See you in February," said the fox. "And not 1 second sooner," said Brownie, and she shuffled off to bed. When the dishes were put away, Bunny and Fox tiptoed out of the house. Midnight glowed on the snow, and the lights twinkled in the trees. "That was nice," said the fox, "but I wish we had a little more pie." "Surprise!" said Bunny, and they ate up every crumb. All right. So that's Brownie, Groundhog, and the Wintry Surprise. It's available here at the Bozeman Public Library. We also have another book by Susan Blackaby, Brownie, Groundhog, and the February Fox. Find these at your local library or in lots of other places. Thanks for listening. It's been a pleasure. This is George from the Bozeman Public Library. See you again soon, I hope. Bye-bye.